Hi guys, thank you for joining me. My name is Holly Baxter. I'm an accredited dietitian and I have a Bachelor of Food Science and Nutrition and a Master of Dietetics. And today I wanted to touch on what is proving to be quite a frequently debated topic, and that is ketogenic diets. So in this video I'm going to cover what it is, how it kind of came about, who it might be beneficial for, and are there any other conditions that ketogenic diets are good for, and is it more beneficial for fat loss? So what is a ketogenic diet? Well, a ketogenic diet is a very high fat diet. It is moderate to low in protein and very low in carbohydrate. And essentially this causes a shift from our primary metabolic fuel source, which is carbohydrates, over to fats. So it alters our fat metabolism so that the body produces these ketone bodies in our liver. And these include things like acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate, for instance, a bit of a mouthful. But these ketones can be used in tissues like our skeletal muscle, but more importantly in our brain. So under normal circumstances, the brain exclusively uses glucose for energy. But in a ketogenic state, the brain actually shifts to using ketones as a fuel source in order to spare glucose for essential tasks like red blood cell metabolism, for example. And that's because they lack a mitochondria. So they can only use glucose for fuel. But keep in mind, even if you do have a 0 grams of carbohydrate, which is very hard to do, mind you, our liver can still produce around 120 grams of glucose per day through a process called gluconeogenesis. And this is for essential tasks from substrates like amino acids and other glucogenic metabolites. So how did the ketogenic diet come about? Well, the keto diet kind of founded itself for its nutritional management of epilepsy and Alzheimer's. And more recently, science has shown that there is some positive clinical outcomes for a number of different cancer types through its ability to minimize tumor growth. And in all three of these diseases, ketones are therapeutic through providing an alternative substrate to glucose. It was then that the ketogenic diet moved over to the bodybuilding community as a dietary method to improve body composition and a way to reduce your body fat. So, are there any other health benefits to a ketogenic diet? Yes, there is data to support the benefit of ketogenic diets for a number of medical conditions like epilepsy, I mentioned earlier, Alzheimer's, cancer, and type 2 diabetes. And in these conditions, providing an alternative fuel source instead of carbohydrate seems to have a therapeutic effect. And in the case of type 2 diabetes, using ketones as fuel instead of glucose can actually help to lower blood glucose levels. So it is important to point out, however, that type 2 diabetes also improves during any form of caloric restriction. So it's likely that the ketogenic diet is not unique in that aspect, but rather it's causing a caloric deficit by severely restricting carbohydrate intake. Ketogenic diets are also found to be possibly helpful in a number of cancer types, and specifically those that are glucose obligates. So this means that they can only grow when glucose is actually present, as the tumors use that as an exclusive fuel. So by limiting carbohydrate intake, so as in a ketogenic diet, and forcing our bodies to use fats and ketone bodies instead of carbohydrate, that can actually have a therapeutic effect by essentially starving the tumors of any fuel. Please keep in mind this is not a cure for cancer, and some cancers are not even glucose obligate users. So if you have cancer, please make sure you always consult with your oncologist recommendations that are specific for your disease. So why are carbohydrates so often referred to as the bad guys? Well, typically carbs are viewed as bad for the body because of the fact that they increase an insulin secretion. And insulin is a hormone that is released when the blood glucose rises, and it shuttles glucose into the various tissues, including muscle and fat. And due to this, insulin is considered a storage hormone, and thus many people have made recommendations to avoid carbohydrates at all costs. But are carbohydrates the cause of body fat gain? Well, since carbohydrates do increase insulin, and insulin is a storage hormone, many people have now made large leaps in logic to point the finger at carbohydrates as being the primary cause of fat gain and obesity. So they also point out in a ketogenic diet that carbohydrates are not being used as fuel hardly at all, whereas fats become the primary fuel. So there's the logic. Eat more fat and burn more fat. While that is true to a certain extent, it's not quite that simple. And these individuals are missing the fact that by limiting carbohydrate to very low levels in the diet, you're typically going to restrict calories as well. So in fact, many people have become so passionate about low-carb lifestyle that they've become keto zealots rather than actually caring about the science of what actually makes fat loss successful. So what is the most common mistake that I see with a ketogenic diet? Well, people not adhering to the correct ratios of macronutrients necessary to ensure you're actually in ketone production. So for example, yes, most people will be able to adhere to low carbohydrates. That's normally not an issue, but it's the ratio of proteins to fats that's often too high. So on a traditional ketogenic diet, carbohydrate intakes are around 5 to 10% of your total calories. Protein is only 10 to 15%. It's fats that make up around 80%. So currently, the most popular form of ketogenic diet is actually a modified keto diet. So it puts people's carbohydrate intake around 5 to 10% of their total calories, which is normal. But protein is a little higher at around 20 to 25% of your total energy. So fats should be making up at least 70%. So keep in mind what I said earlier. When you have a really high protein intake, your body is actually able to convert some of that protein through the process of gluconeogenesis into glucose. So if you have a really high protein diet, that does not necessarily mean you're in a ketogenic state. So now I'm going to tell you why ketogenic diets are not better for fat loss. There are several studies that keto zealots often point out in order to support their claims that ketogenic diets are better. So for example, a recent meta-analysis published in 2013 compared very low-calorie ketogenic diets to low-fat diets with a minimum follow-up of 12 months. And they found that in individuals who were assigned to the very low-calorie ketogenic diet were able to achieve greater weight loss than participants in the low-fat group with regular carbohydrates. Now, what this study does not consider is that the research studies selected for inclusion in this analysis did not equate for protein, and in some cases, they didn't even equate for overall caloric intake. So one of the studies might have had this amount of calories, and the other one might have had this amount. So they're not comparing the same thing. So it's likely that greater weight loss was achieved in the very low-calorie ketogenic diets simply by default. So to summarize what I've just said, when it comes to overall body composition and fat loss, ketogenic diets are not better than a carbohydrate-containing diet when both calories and protein are equated. Perhaps the idea of being able to eat lots of fats at every meal sounds appealing, but that doesn't come without nutritional consequences, because eliminating carbohydrates means that like any diet that restricts whole food groups, it makes it far more difficult to meet the daily micronutrient requirements of certain vitamins and minerals, so particularly B vitamins. So it is important to make sure that you consume a really wide variety of fresh fruit and vegetables if you're going to try keto, as these are essential for not only their fiber, but vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. And in any case, I strongly recommend taking a multivitamin as well as an iron supplement, specifically women or males on a low-calorie diet, since it is really difficult to consume sufficient amounts of iron and reasonably ask this without essentially all protein sources coming from lean red meat. So, what does the science say? Well, when calories and protein are equal, a ketogenic diet does not seem to offer any additional fat loss benefits when compared to an equal calorie, equal protein, non-ketogenic diet. And that's according to a study published in 2006 by the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And in this highly controlled study, both lost almost equal amounts of weight and body fat. So my recommendation, any nutritional strategy that sees you in a caloric deficit is going to result in fat loss. If you prefer to have high fat foods in preference to carbohydrate containing foods, particularly during a phase of a caloric deficit, and you find it easier to adhere to this, then by all means attempt a ketogenic diet. But be sure that you can make it a lifestyle. There's little benefit to following a dietary strategy that's not maintainable long term. So many people will lose weight on a ketogenic diet only to pile it back on afterwards when carbohydrates are introduced. So sustainability is probably the key thing to think about here. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found that useful. If you would like help in preparing a ketogenic diet or you're interested in learning more, you can actually jump onto my website. I'll put the link up here for you so that you can check that out. But I have an online meal plan generator that will give you a keto diet. I also have some other useful information on my website under the articles section. It discusses foods that are appropriate for consumption when you're undertaking a ketogenic diet and foods that are not. So if you want to give it a try, there's also some resources there for you. Thanks for watching. Follow me along on Instagram if you're not already. It's Holly T. Baxter. I have my YouTube channel, Holly Baxter, and my website is www.hbnutrition.com.au. Thanks, guys.